Imagine, just for a second, the year we're sitting in the smoldering aftermath of the largest armored clash since World War II.
Just absolute unimaginable destruction all around you.
Right. You've just pushed your way through this literal inferno of burning oil fields. The smoke is so thick, it literally turns day into night.
Oh, yeah. You can't see your hand in front of your face.
Exactly. And you've endured this suffocating claustrophobic terror of chemical weapon alarms, right? Not knowing if the air you are breathing is about to turn lethal.
Which is terrifying.
It's beyond terrifying, but miraculously, you make it through the entire ground war without a single casualty in your battalion. Not one.
It's unheard of.
You did everything right, your unit functioned perfectly, but then after guns fall silent and they're planning the victory parades back home, you make this horrifying discovery.
Yeah, the real nightmare starts.
Right. Your greatest enemy isn't the Iraqi Republican Guard. Your greatest enemy is a 110-degree hill covered in the rotting, sun-bleached bones of dead goats, plus pulverizing sandstorms and this just impenetrable, invisible wall of military bureaucracy.
It really is the ultimate bait and switch. I mean, you spend months preparing your mind and your body for the absolute worst horrors of modern mechanized combat.
You're ready to die for your country.
Right, you survive the worst of it. And then you end up fighting this grinding war of attrition against, like, a logistics spreadsheet.
That surreal juxtaposition is exactly what we are exploring today in this deep dive.
Yeah.
And we have a really fascinating stack of sources to build this picture for you.
Some really incredible documents.
Yeah, we're looking at a very comprehensive, officially published military monograph that details the exact movements of the I Marine Expeditionary Force in the Persian Gulf.
The official record, basically.
Exactly. Plus, we've got historical unit archives that map out decades of their combat legacy. We're looking at some just incredibly evocative combat photography, too.
You can almost feel the grit and the heat of the desert when you look at those photos.
You really can. And perhaps the most critical piece of the puzzle today is a gritty, on-the-ground newspaper article from 1991 that just blew the lid off this entire bizarre situation.
Which is vital, right? Because it shifts our perspective completely.
So.
Well, this isn't just a high-level story about grand military strategy or flanking maneuvers. This is a story about the profound human friction that happens when the messy physical reality on the ground just, collides with the cold, rigid logic of a massive system.
It's the human element. So our mission for this deep dive is to reconstruct this incredible, entirely absurd and largely forgotten story of the 3rd Battalion, 23rd Marines.
Often just referred to as the 323.
With the 323.
Yeah.
And their journey through Operation Desert Storm is just something else entirely. We're going to trace their path from being this group of civilian reservists living totally normal lives.
Yeah, just dispensing medications, studying for exams.
Right, through the smoke-choked violence of a 100-hour ground war, straight into their grueling stranding on this place called Hill 99.
It's a story that completely redefines what it actually takes to survive a war.
It really does. And if we're going to understand the pure absurdity of where the 323 ended up, I think we have to start by understanding who they were, right, the moment they got the call.
Absolutely, because they weren't stepping onto a blank slate. They were stepping into a massive, imposing historical shadow.
Right, because the 323 isn't just some random collection of weekend warriors. You look at their World War II legacy, and it's staggering.
It really is.
But I need you to put this into perspective for us, because the archives say the 23rd Marine Regiment was activated in July 1942, and in just 13 months, they made 4 major amphibious assaults.
4 in just over a year.
We're talking Kwajalein, Saipan, Tinian, and Iwo Jima. Now, as someone who hasn't stormed a beach, what does 4 amphibious assaults in 13 months actually mean in terms of, human endurance?
I mean, it means experiencing the absolute pinnacle of industrialized violence repeatedly with almost no time to recover. An amphibious assault is arguably the most complex and dangerous maneuver in all of warfare. You're taking troops from a ship, putting them into these small, totally vulnerable landing craft, and driving them straight into heavily fortified, static enemy defenses.
Defenses that have been preparing for you to do exactly that.
Exactly. They have pre-registered their artillery on the exact stretch of sand you are landing on. You have no cover. You have nowhere to retreat.
You're just running into a meat grinder.
Precisely. And the 23rd Marines did this 4 times in just over a year.
Unbelievable.
At Kwajalein, specifically the island of Roy Namor, they were fighting in jungles and blockhouses. Saipan was this month-long bloodbath characterized by massive Japanese banzai charges.
And Tinian was right after that, right?
Tinian immediately followed. And then Iwo Jima, which is just etched into the very DNA of the Marine Corps. The 4th Marine Division, which the 23rd was a part of, suffered more than 17,000 casualties during those Pacific campaigns.
17,000. That is just a horrifying number to even comprehend.
It is. So when a modern Marine is assigned to the 323, they are inheriting those specific ghosts. They are wearing a patch that represents almost unimaginable sacrifice and absolute combat effectiveness.
It's heavy.
Very heavy. The institutional expectation isn't just that you will fight. The expectation is that you will execute the most difficult maneuvers known to modern warfare and you will not fail.
Which brings us to the wild contrast of 1990. So August 1990 rolls around. Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. Operation Desert Shield kicks off.
The massive buildup.
Right. The U.S. military starts mobilizing.
Yeah.
But the modern 323 that gets called up, they are a reserve infantry battalion. The sources list their civilian occupations, and it reads like a cross-section of a small town.
It really does.
We have college students, we have pharmacists, lawyers, state troopers. There is even a preacher in the mix.
Yeah, just everyday guys.
Exactly. And they are being pulled from places like Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee.
And that is the fascinating psychological reality of the citizen soldier, right? Think about the mental whiplash.
Oh, it must be insane.
The psychology of a career active duty infantryman is built over years of daily immersion in military culture. Their entire life is oriented around the possibility of deployment.
Well, that's all we do.
Right. But for a reservist, the military is a part-time commitment. You drill 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer.
Right. So on a Tuesday, you're a pharmacist in Arkansas, arguing with an insurance company over a prescription refill.
And by Thursday, you are on a transport plane, deployed to the Saudi Arabian desert.
It's crazy.
And you're being briefed that you are going up against the Iraqi army, which at the time was the 4th largest army in the world.
Wait, really? The 4th largest?
Yes. An army that had just spent 8 solid years fighting a brutal, chemical-laced war of attrition against Iran. They were battle-hardened, heavily armored, and totally dug in.
And you, the pharmacist, are expected to channel the ghosts of Iwo Jima to defeat them.
Exactly.
I'm trying to imagine that mindset. You're suddenly wearing the same uniform as the guys who took Saipan, but your last major conflict was, like, a property dispute in civil court.
It's a huge leap.
How do they even begin to bridge that gap? Because this build-up phase, Operation Desert Shield, lasted for months. What did they actually do to prepare?
Well, they trained relentlessly, but they did it in an environment that was essentially designed to strip away their civilian identities entirely. The military placed them in these vast, isolated desert expanses in Saudi Arabia.
Just miles of sand.
Right. And because they were operating in a strict, fundamentalist Islamic host nation, the cultural restrictions were absolute.
Meaning no alcohol. Right. I read they had to celebrate the Marine Corps birthday in November without a single drop of liquor.
Yep. No alcohol, no Western media, no liberty in local towns, no interaction with the local populace. It was an environment of profound sensory deprivation.
Just total isolation.
The isolation was intense. You're just sitting in the sand, cleaning your weapon, running drills, and waiting for a massive mechanized war to start. The sheer monotony was a test of endurance.
The sources mention a few attempts to break up that monotony, which just sounds incredibly surreal to me.
Oh, definitely.
Like, Arnold Schwarzenegger apparently flew out in November 1990 and opened a recreation center with a pool and waits for the Marines in a place called Dubail.
Yeah, the Terminator shows up.
Right. And then there was this thing called Operation Scrub and Grub, where American expat families living in Saudi Arabia would invite Marines over just so they could have a hot shower and eat something that didn't come out of a brown plastic bag.
Which is a really nice gesture, obviously, but it really emphasizes how feral their existence had become.
Totally.
A hot shower and a home-cooked meal were considered extreme luxuries. They were living in the dirt, lifting these Fred Flintstone concrete weights they poured themselves.
Wait, they made their own weights out of concrete?
Yeah, just pouring concrete into cans or whatever they could find, and they're just trying to rapidly accelerate their mindset from civilian to combatant.
And that waiting, that endless tension, finally snaps in February 1991. The military sets G-Day, the start of the ground offensive.
The moment of truth.
But before we get into the combat, I need some clarity on the structure here. Where exactly does this battalion, the 323, fit into this massive invasion force?
The strategic layout was complex, but basically Marine Forces Central Command, or MARCENT, had expanded massively.
Okay.
The 323, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Ray Dawson, was a reserve battalion, so they were attached to an active duty unit to round out its numbers.
So they get plugged into a regular unit.
Right. They were attached to the 8th Marine Regiment, which fell under the 2nd Marine Division.
Got it. So they are the reservists plugged into an active duty regiment. And from what the monograph says, they actually start fighting before G-Day even officially begins.
Yeah, they were out front.
February 22nd, 1991. G-Day -2. What exactly are they doing?
So their initial mission was to provide forward security. The border between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait was marked by these massive defensive sandbars.
Huge walls of sand.
Exactly. To invade, the coalition needed paths through them. So 2 days before the main assault, combat engineers drive these massive armored bulldozers right up to the border.
While getting shot at, probably.
Oh, certainly under threat of fire. And they physically cut 3 gaps through the sand berms. The 323 pushes through those gaps to secure the area on the other side.
And what they find on the other side sounds like an absolute nightmare. The sources describe them pushing into the Ghadir oil field.
Yeah.
And the sky is just
It's
gone.
apocalyptic.
It's choked with this thick black smoke and haze.
Yes.
Saddam's forces had intentionally set the Kuwaiti oil wells on fire.
Yes. The Iraqi army understood they couldn't defeat the coalition in a straight high-tech fight.
Because we had all the new toys.
Right. The U.S. had precision-guided munitions, laser targeting, and advanced optics. So the Iraqis weaponized the environment itself. By detonating the wellheads, they released millions of barrels of burning crude oil into the atmosphere.
It's just hard to even picture that scale of pollution.
The smoke was so dense, so full of heavy particulates, that it literally blocked out the sun. It was an environmental catastrophe engineered to act as a massive, theater-wide smokescreen.
Okay, so you are driving a Humvee or a 5-ton truck into what looks like midnight at noon. But surely the U.S. military had technology to deal with smoke, right? We have lasers and smart bombs.
That is exactly what the 323 assumed. And it brings us to a really terrifying moment, detailed in the monograph.
What happens?
A forward air controller, a specialized Marine whose job is to coordinate airstrikes, is attached to the 323. They spot a high-priority Iraqi target through the gloom.
Okay.
It's a pumping station, but it's heavily fortified with entrenched infantry and vehicles. The forward air controller gets on the radio, calls in the aircraft, and attempts to paint the target with a laser designator.
Which is how smart bombs know where to go, right? They follow the laser dot.
Exactly. A laser designator fires a concentrated beam of infrared light at the target. The light reflects off the target, scattering into the sky.
Like a beacon.
Yes. The incoming bomb has a seeker head that looks for that specific wavelength of reflected light, and it steers its fins to hit the dot. But for that to work, the beam has to maintain its cohesion from the designator to the target and from the target to the bomb.
And the oil smoke stops that.
Completely. Crude oil smoke isn't like campfire smoke.
It's thicker.
Way thicker. It is full of massive, dense, unburned carbon particulates and complex hydrocarbons. When the Marine fired his laser into that smoke, the beam didn't reach the target.
Oh, wow.
The particulate scattered the light immediately. The laser just diffused into the soot. The aircraft circling above couldn't see anything. The high-tech advantage was instantly negated by burning oil.
So they are completely blind. They can't call in air support. They're staring at a fortified Iraqi position filled with armor and troops.
Who is you?
Because if I'm a weekend warrior and my multi-million-dollar air support just shrugged and flew away, I might just sit in my trench and wait for the wind to change.
And that is the crux of why this battalion is so remarkable. A lesser unit or a poorly trained unit might have stalled.
Right, they'd panic.
They might have requested new orders or waited for conditions to improve. But the 323 didn't hesitate. When the high-tech solution failed, they instantly adapted and reverted to fundamental World War II-era infantry tactics.
The sources say they used their organic 81mm mortars and direct fire. But wait, if the smoke is so thick that a laser can't get through, how on earth are they aiming mortars?
That's a great question.
Mortars lob shells in a high arc, right? You have to know exactly where the enemy is. How do you hit a target you can't see?
This is where we talk about the geometry and mechanics of indirect fire. A mortar team doesn't actually need to see the target. They just need to know exactly where they are and exactly where the target is on a map.
Okay, so how do they find that out?
When the 323 encountered the enemy, they used forward observers Marines who crawled as close as they could to the enemy positions without being seen.
Just crawling through the oily dirt.
Right. Those observers had map grids compasses, and binoculars. They estimated the distance and the azimuth, the directional angle to the Iraqi bunkers.
So they are out there doing math in the dark while getting shot at.
Exactly. The forward observer radios those coordinates back to the mortar pit. The mortar team, who might be hundreds of yards behind the front line in complete cover, takes those coordinates, applies ballistic math based on the type of shell in the wind, and sets the angle and direction of their mortar tube.
Sounds complicated under pressure.
It is. They fire a single spotting round. The forward observer watches where it lands and radios back a correction like, drop 50, right 20.
Adjusting on the fly.
The mortar team adjusts the tubes slightly, and then they say, fire for effect. And suddenly, a dozen high-explosive shells rain down on an enemy that thought they were completely hidden in the smoke.
That is incredible. They just systematically dismantled this compound. Company I of the 323 pushes forward. They clear this massive supply cache and observation post, and then they literally rig the whole thing with explosives and blow it off the map.
They absolutely decimated the Iraqi armor in that sector. They combined those blind mortar strikes with direct fire from their anti-armor weapons, and they called in conventional heavy artillery from the 14th Marines.
Wow.
The battle damage assessment from that one engagement is staggering.
I actually have the list right here, but I need you to translate the military jargon for us. The sources say they destroyed 5 BTR-60s, 3 BRDMs, and 8 Soviet-made tanks. A mix of T-55s and T-62s. Give me a visual. What exactly are they blowing up?
Well, these are all Soviet-designed vehicles that the Iraqi army purchased. A T-55 and a T-62 are main battle tanks.
So big, scary tanks.
Very big. They are heavily armored, they have large caliber main guns, and they are designed to smash through infantry lines.
Okay, terrifying. And the others?
A BTR-60 is an 8-wheeled armored personnel carrier. It looks like a massive armored metal box on wheels.
Like a tank bus.
Basically. It's designed to ferry infantry across the battlefield while protecting them from shrapnel and small arms fire, and it usually has a heavy machine gun on top.
Okay, got it.
Nice.
And the BRDMs?
A BRDM is a smaller, 4-wheeled armored scout car. It's heavily armed and highly mobile. So you have this mix of heavy tanks and armored troop transports. The 323, largely using infantry weapons and mortars, turned them into burning scrap metal.
And they didn't just destroy equipment. The monograph notes they inflicted over 50 enemy casualties, and then out of the black smoke, Iraqi soldiers just started emerging from their trenches.
They were totally broken.
They were walking through their own defensive minefields just to surrender to these reservists.
The 323 captured 238 prisoners of war in that single engagement, including an Iraqi battalion commander from the 29th Infantry Division.
Okay, this is where I have to step back and just marvel at this, because there is always this underlying stereotype that reservists are the B team, right?
Oh, absolutely. The weekend warriors.
Yeah, that they are somehow less capable than the active duty guys.
Right.
But here we have a battalion of college kids and lawyers. They lose their air support. They are fighting in near zero visibility against entrenched armor. And they systematically wipe out a hardened Iraqi compound, capture hundreds of prisoners, and they do it with zero friendly casualties. None.
It's phenomenal.
How is that possible?
Yeah.
What does that say about their training versus the Iraqis' training?
It proves that the Marine Corps doctrine regarding reservists actually works. The philosophy is that there is no distinction in fundamental training.
A Marine is a Marine.
Exactly. The immediate action drills, the land navigation, the cross-training on weapons systems, a reservist, learns the exact same curriculum as an active duty Marine.
What you see at Amrider is the triumph of decentralized command.
Meaning the lower-ranking guys stepping up.
Right. When the high-tech plan failed, the junior officers and squad leaders of the 323 didn't freeze. They didn't wait for a general to tell them what to do. They took initiative.
And the Iraqis? Well, the Iraqi command structure was famously rigid, mirroring Soviet doctrine. It relied heavily on top-down control. Once their static defenses were breached and their communications were disrupted by the attack, the local commanders didn't know how to adapt.
They just fell apart without orders.
When they started taking punishing, highly accurate mortar fire out of the smoke, their morale shattered. They surrendered because the 323 achieved absolute tactical dominance through flexibility.
So the ghosts of Iwo Jima are looking down, nodding in approval. The 323 passes this massive first test flawlessly. And because they proved themselves, they get assigned as the motorized reserve for the 8th Marines.
Moving up in responsibility.
They push deeper into Kuwait. But this is where the story shifts from conventional warfare into, like, psychological horror. Because the tanks they were blowing up, that was an enemy they could see and shoot. The environment was hiding an invisible enemy that was infinitely more terrifying.
Yeah, the invisible threats are always the worst. We're talking about February 25th. This is G-Day +1. The 323 is moving rapidly north. They are mounted in these massive M923 5-ton cargo trucks.
Just big open bed trucks.
Right. And because the coalition advance is moving so fast across the desert, a physical gap opens up on the battlefield between the 1st Marine Division and the 2nd Marine Division.
Which is bad. You don't want a hole in your lines.
Extremely bad. If an Iraqi armored column slips into that gap, they can attack the flanks of either division. It could be devastating.
So they need someone to plug it.
So the 323 is deployed into that gap to provide flank security. They are the plug in the hole.
And as they push into this gap, they stumble into what the military called the farm complex. And suddenly, the lead elements start taking sniper and RPG fire from their right front.
Out of nowhere.
This place isn't just a farm. It's a labyrinth of concrete bunkers, buildings, and trenches.
Again, picture the sensory environment. It's night. The sky is still black from the oil smoke.
It's totally dark.
There are secondary explosions happening in the distance. The air smells like sulfur and burning diesel. You are taking rocket fire from a concrete bunker complex, but you can't actually see the shooters.
Right. So how do you fight that? You can't just send guys with rifles sprinting into the dark against machine guns.
You don't. The 323 turns to their heavy weapons, specifically the TOW missile systems mounted on their vehicles.
Okay, pause. A TOW missile is a wire-guided anti-tank weapon. Right, you fire it to blow up a tank. Why are they using high-end anti-tank ordnance just to look at a farm complex?
Because of the optics attached to the launcher, the TOW system has a sighting unit that includes a highly sensitive FLIR camera forward-looking infrared, thermal imaging.
Oh, like night vision, but better.
It doesn't rely on ambient light, and crucially, it can see through most smoke.
Because it's reading heat, not light.
Exactly. Everything emits infrared radiation heat. A running tank engine emits a massive amount of heat. A human body emits heat. The thermal sight detects those temperature differences and translates them into a visible image on a screen.
So they just pop up bright as day.
Warm objects glow white against the cooler, darker background of the desert night.
That is brilliant. So the Marines are looking through these thermal sights, peering into this pitch-black, smoke-filled farm complex, and they start seeing the bright white heat signatures of Iraqi soldiers in armored vehicles hiding among the buildings.
And once you can see the target, you can kill it. They didn't even need to fire the expensive TOW missiles in every case.
They just use them as binoculars.
They used the thermal sights to spot the targets and then directed their heavy machine guns, automatic grenade launchers, and mortars onto those exact coordinates.
The battle damage assessment from that night is wild. They destroyed 12 BMPs, and you mentioned those before. Those are heavily armed infantry fighting vehicles, right?
Yes, much more lethal than a BTR. A BMP has heavy armor, an anti-tank missile launcher, and a 73mm cannon. It is a serious threat.
And they destroyed 12 of them, plus 2 BRDMs, 9 T-62 tanks, and 2 advanced T-72 tanks, which were like the pride of the Iraqi Armored Corps, and a massive ammunition bunker. They basically erased an entire armored strongpoint using thermals.
But it was right in the middle of this chaotic, highly kinetic firefight that the entire battalion was hit with the true nightmare scenario, the NBC threat. Nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons.
This was the terror hanging over the entire Gulf War. Everyone knew Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons. He'd used them extensively against Iranian troops in the 1980s, and he'd used them to massacre Kurdish civilians in his own country. Gas was the ultimate wild card.
It was the one asymmetric capability the Iraqi army had that could theoretically halt the coalition advance. A concentrated nerve gas attack could wipe out thousands of troops in minutes.
Just a horrific thought.
And the sources detail a heart-stopping moment during this advance at the farm complex. The coalition forces utilized a specialized German-supplied vehicle called the Fox. It's an armored, mobile chemical detection laboratory.
You hear mobile laboratory, but what does that actually mean? How does a truck sniff the air for poison?
The Fox vehicle uses a system called a mass spectrometer. Essentially, it takes continuous samples of the air or the soil outside the vehicle. Inside the lab, it bombards those samples with electrons to ionize the molecules, giving them an electric charge.
Okay, I feel like we are in a chemistry class right now.
Stick with me because it's vital to what happens next. Based on how much the magnetic field bends the trajectory of the molecules, the computer can determine their exact mass-to-charge ratio.
So it knows exactly what's in the air.
It compares that data against a built-in library of known chemical warfare agents. It is incredibly precise. It can detect parts per million of a lethal agent.
Okay, so this highly advanced rolling chemistry lab is sniffing the air near the 323 during this battle, and it gets a hit. It flags the air for possible nerve or mustard agent.
That is the alarm everyone had been dreading for 6 months. The moment that alert goes out over the radio, the order comes down to every unit in the sector. Assume MOPP level 4 immediately.
MOPP Level 4. Mission-Oriented Protective Posture. This is the absolute maximum level of chemical protection. For those of us who have never worn one, explain exactly what it feels like to put this on in a desert combat zone.
It is absolute physical and psychological misery. A MOPP suit isn't just a plastic raincoat. It consists of a heavy two-piece overgarment. But the crucial part is the lining. The inside of the suit is lined with a thick layer of activated charcoal.
Why charcoal?
Because of a process called adsorption, not absorption, with a B, like a sponge soaking up water. Adsorption with a D.
What's the difference?
Activated charcoal is incredibly porous at a microscopic level. It has a massive surface area. When toxic chemical gas molecules pass through the fabric of the suit, they chemically bond to the surface of the charcoal pores. They get trapped before they can reach your skin.
So the suit is literally filtering the air around your body.
Yes. But to achieve that, you are wearing a heavy, suffocating layer of carbon. On top of that, you have to pull on thick rubber overboots over your combat boots. You put on thick rubber gloves. And finally, you don the protective gas mask.
Just wrapping yourself in rubber and carbon.
You have to pull the straps tight to ensure a perfect rubber seal against your skin. You are breathing through a heavy canister filter that restricts your airflow. You have to suck the air in forcefully.
I want you, the listener, to try and imagine this for a second. You are in the middle of a chaotic nighttime firefight. Your adrenaline is spiking. You are sweating profusely. And suddenly, you have to shove your body into a sweltering, unventilated rubber and charcoal suit.
It's unbearable.
The monograph specifically notes that the charcoal liners would shed this fine black dust. It stuck to the Marines' sweating faces. When they finally took the masks off, they looked like coal miners.
The physiological strain of MOPP4 in the desert is immense. Your body regulates its temperature by sweating, allowing the evaporation to cool your skin.
Right, but in a rubber suit?
In an MOPP suit, the sweat has nowhere to evaporate. It just pools in your rubber boots and runs down your back. Your core temperature spikes. You are breathing through a restrictive straw. Your peripheral vision is cut off by the mask. Your hearing is muffled. It induces profound claustrophobia.
And here's the most agonizing detail of this entire incident. They got the alarm, they put the suits on, and then they waited. How long did it take for the Fox vehicle to run the deep confirmation test to see if they were actually under chemical attack?
6 hours.
6 hours.
Yes. The initial alert is an automated rapid response alarm, but to confirm the exact nature and concentration of the agent, the technicians inside the Fox vehicle have to run much more complex, time-consuming mass spectrometry analyses.
That is unimaginable. 6 hours sitting in a sweltering, claustrophobic rubber suit. You are breathing your own hot, recycled breath. Every time your skin itches, you wonder if it's sweat or a blister agent eating through the suit.
It's pure psychological torture.
You wonder if your mask seal is tight enough. And, spoiler alert for the listener, it was a false positive.
Which is completely understandable given the environment. Remember the mass spectrometer we talked about? It analyzes complex molecules. The air in Kuwait at that moment was saturated with millions of tons of complex, unburned hydrocarbons and exotic chemical byproducts from the burning oil wells.
So the machine just got confused.
It overwhelmed the sensors. The machine saw a massive spike in bizarre chemical compounds and triggered the alarm just to be safe.
Better safe than sorry, obviously, but what does that do to the mind of a soldier? How does a commander maintain any kind of unit cohesion or forward momentum when every single person in the battalion is trapped in their own personal sensory deprivation rubber bubble for a quarter of a day?
It requires an immense level of discipline and trust. Verbal communication breaks down almost entirely. You can't shout through a gas mask over the roar of a diesel engine.
So how do you even talk?
You have to rely on hand signals, exaggerated gestures, and physical contact. Leaders have to walk the line, physically tapping their Marines on the shoulder, looking directly into the glass eyepieces of their masks to check their pupils for signs of nerve agent exposure.
Wow, just looking into their eyes.
Or just to check for the glazed look of a heat casualty or panic. The fact that the 323 maintained their defensive perimeter, cleared the complex, and didn't fall apart psychologically during that 6-hour wait speaks to an incredibly high level of mental resilience.
It is staggering endurance, but they do it. They push through the chemical alarms, they clear the farm complex, they capture hundreds more prisoners, and then, after 100 hours of flawless, terrifying, but ultimately victorious combat, the ground war abruptly ends.
This stops.
It is February 28th. Offensive hostilities are officially suspended. The 323 did their job perfectly. They suffered 0 casualties in heavy combat. But here is the ultimate twist of this entire deep dive. For the men of the 323, surviving the war was just the prologue. The end of the war was the beginning of their worst nightmare.
And this is where the narrative abruptly shifts genres. We move from a high-stakes story of military triumph and technological warfare into a Kafkaesque study of bureaucratic absurdity.
It really is absurd.
The shooting had stopped, but the logistical problem had just begun. Moving a 500,000-person army into a theater of war takes months. Getting them out is even harder. To manage this, the military instituted a retrograde policy known informally as desert calm.
Desert calm. It sounds like an herbal tea or a spa retreat.
I assure you it was neither. The core driving tenet of desert calm was unit integrity. The military did not want to demobilize individuals piecemeal.
Why not? Just send guys home when they're done.
Because if you send home a few guys from this squad and a few guys from that platoon, you are left with broken, undeployable skeleton units scattered across the globe. The doctrinal logic was strict. You trained together, you deployed as a unit, you fought as a unit, and you will return to the United States as an intact, combat-ready fighting force.
Okay, I can see the logic. If you were explaining that on a whiteboard at the Pentagon, it makes perfect sense. Keep the teams together. But how does that logic trap the 323 in the desert?
It comes down to the inflexibility of how the military tracks human beings. Remember the organizational chart we discussed earlier?
Yeah, they were attached to an active unit.
Right. The 323 was a reserve battalion. They were artificially attached to the 8th Marine Regiment to round out its numbers for the invasion. Well, the 8th Marine Regiment happened to be the very last active duty regiment to arrive in the Persian Gulf. They got off the boats shortly after Christmas.
Oh, no. I see where this is going.
Yes. The cold, hard military logistical doctrine dictated a strict policy of first in, first out. The units that had been sitting in the desert since August got to go home first.
That makes sense for them.
But since the 8th Regiment was the last to arrive, they would be the absolute last to leave. And because the 323 was attached to the 8th Regiment on paper, they were locked into that timeline.
You know, it is fascinating to look at the mechanics of military logistics here. They use a concept similar to block stacking in warehouse management.
How so?
In a warehouse, if you stack crates in a deep lane, you can't get to the crate at the back till you move all the crates in front of it. The military treats battalions like identical shipping containers. They apply basic FIFO, first in, first out accounting to human lives.
That is exactly what happens. The system is blind to the contents of the crate. It doesn't differentiate between an active duty Marine who does this full-time, who lives on base, and a reservist whose civilian career, college education, and family life are completely paused and deteriorating back home.
It's just numbers on a page.
The spreadsheet simply says the 8th Regiment is at the back of the queue, so the 323 is at the back of the queue.
It is so wildly unjust. It's like surviving a massive, catastrophic hurricane. You are sitting on the roof of your flooded house, waiting for rescue. The rescue helicopters arrive, but they fly right past you, waving, because your neighborhood zip code starts with an 8 instead of a 1.
That's a perfect analogy.
You are a hero, you did everything right. But to the logistics spreadsheet, you're just a rounding error that hasn't been cleared yet. And what makes it so much worse is the contrast. While the active duty guys from other units are packing their sea bags, and even the top Marine commander, General Boomer, gets on a plane back to Camp Pendleton, the reservists of the 323 are explicitly ordered to stay behind in the Kuwaiti desert. What was their official mission supposed to be?
Their official operational order was to show presence.
Show presence. What does that actually mean in military terms?
It is a classic deterrence strategy. You leave a heavily armed, highly visible footprint in a recently conquered area to remind the defeated enemy, in this case, the remnants of Saddam Hussein's forces, that you are still there and you are fully capable of resuming hostilities if they violate the ceasefire.
Just flexing your muscles, basically.
It's supposed to project power and stability. But as we'll see, the 323 was entirely the wrong tool for this job, placed in the wrong environment under the worst possible conditions.
Which brings us to the absolute centerpiece of the Washington Post article by William Booth. Where does a bureaucratic rounding error go to show presence? They go to Hill 99. And this is the point in the deep dive where the story completely leaves military history behind and turns into a dark, absurdist survival comedy.
But a comedy where people are genuinely suffering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's set the scene based on Booth's reporting, which was published on April 27, 1991. That date is crucial. This is 59 days after the ground war officially ended.
2 months.
The 323 has been sitting in the desert for 2 months of peacetime. We have roughly 1,000 Marines dug into a geographic feature named Hill 99, located about 15 miles south of Kuwait City.
And the environment is straight out of a post-apocalyptic movie. It is 110 degrees outside. And they didn't just set up camp on a pristine sand dune.
Oh, not at all.
The Post reporter specifically documents that Hill 99 was an old Bedouin burial ground, or perhaps an abandoned, massive slaughterhouse. The ground is literally carpeted with the dismembered parts, skulls, and sun-bleached bones of sheep and goats.
That's sickening.
There are rats everywhere. They are constantly battered by pulverizing, blinding sandstorms that coat everything in grit.
And because of those abysmal sanitary conditions and the extreme heat, the physical toll on these men was catastrophic. It was far worse than anything they suffered from the Iraqi artillery. Dysentery swept through the camp. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke were taking out Marines left and right.
It's a medical disaster waiting to happen.
You look at the medical logs noted in the article, and it is horrifying. The unit's medical staff was going through 100 bags of intravenous fluid Vazi-Bag in a single week, just to keep the men from going into hypovolemic shock from dehydration.
100 bags a week.
Yes. There's this quote from a lance corporal named Don Fulcard from Louisiana. He is talking to the reporter, and he just casually mentions, "I took 4 bags myself yesterday."
4 bags of 5E fluid in 24 hours.
Yeah. He was losing so much fluid to diarrhea and the blistering sun that the medics had to pump 4 bags of saline into his veins just to keep him standing. And look at their daily life. They are living in abandoned, filthy Iraqi military tents that they had to scavenge.
They didn't even have their own gear.
No. When they want to get cleaned, they don't have showers.
Yeah.
They're taking showers in these mobile devices that were explicitly designed to spray down and decontaminate the victims of chemical weapon attacks.
And we have to analyze their nutrition, which was a massive failure of sustainment logistics. The military has different rations for different situations. MRE's meals ready to eat are designed for high-intensity combat, not for sitting static in 110-degree heat for 2 months.
Right, they block you up.
Exactly. But the menu Booth observed consisted of Spam Creole, dehydrated eggs, Twinkies, and what he described as a mysterious, unidentifiable, reddish stew.
That sounds like a recipe for exactly the kind of dysentery they were suffering from.
It offers no nutritional recovery. And to combat the heat, their officers ordered them to drink 5 gallons of water a day. But the water they were getting was sitting in large plastic bladders in the sun.
Boiling hot plastic water.
It was incredibly warm, tasting of plastic and iodine, making it almost unpalatable. The desperation to cool down was so acute that Marines were reportedly filling plastic buckets with water and just sitting in them, fully clothed, to try and lower their core body temperature through conduction.
I mean, the supreme cosmic irony here is just staggering. Think about what we just discussed. They charged through minefields, they faced down Soviet-made tanks, they survived artillery barrages and chemical weapon scares, all without a single man dying.
They were invincible in combat.
But now, in the glorious aftermath of victory, they are literally disintegrating, hooked up to 5E needles, surrounded by goat bones because of diarrhea and the sun.
It highlights a very real, very dangerous failure in military doctrine at the time. Winning the kinetic battle is only part of warfare. Sustaining the force after the battle is equally critical, and it completely fell apart here.
It's just a total breakdown.
The psychological degradation that occurs when you take highly trained, highly motivated troops and leave them to rot in a garbage dump is profound, and it completely undermined their official mission. Remember, they were supposed to be showing presence. They were supposed to be the terrifying deterrent keeping Saddam Hussein in check.
Right. But as the Marines themselves eagerly pointed out to the reporter, the deterrent was a complete illusion. They had practically no ammunition left.
None.
The mortar platoon, the guys who brilliantly saved the day at the Gudere oil field by firing blinder blank, had no mortar shells. They couldn't have fired a mission if they wanted to. The officers who carry sidearms were literally stuffing wads of tissue paper into the bottom of their pistol magazines just to give the springs tension so to maintain the physical illusion that their guns were loaded.
Wow.
It was a complete facade.
And the diplomatic reality was just as absurd.
Oh, this is the best part. The reporter, William Booth, wanders over to a nearby encampment of Saudi Arabian troops. These are our coalition allies, the people we are supposedly protecting by showing presence. Booth asks them about the American Marines on the hill next door.
And what'd they say?
The Saudi troops have absolutely no idea the Americans are even there. The 323 was deterring an enemy who couldn't see them, with weapons they literally couldn't fire.
It is the absolute theater of the absurd. You have a battalion stripped of its lethal capability, stripped of its basic dignity, and left with no clear timeline for extraction. You have to understand military psychology. When a unit loses its purpose, when its operational tempo drops to absolute zero in a hostile environment, you inevitably start seeing a breakdown in traditional military decorum.
They stop acting like soldiers.
The rigid hierarchy starts to fray.
Oh, the decorum was completely gone. The Post describes men walking around the camp in boxer shorts, completely barefoot in the sand, with their metal dog tags just dangling around their deeply tanned necks. When the newspaper reporter showed up with the camera, an officer actually had to run around frantically ordering men to put pants on so they wouldn't look like a militia.
They were trying to invent ways to pass the time?
They were lifting those concrete Fred Flintstone weights they poured themselves, and at night they pooled their own money, bought a television and a VCR from a local Kuwaiti who was scavenging, set it up in a sandbag theater, and watched a VHS tape of Pretty Woman 10 times in a row because it was the only tape they had. I have to ask you seriously, at this point, is this a military encampment, or is this a deleted scene from Lord of the Flies?
It has elements of both, but fundamentally what you are looking at is a pressure cooker. You have an entire battalion of highly educated, highly capable civilians. Remember, these are lawyers, business owners, college students.
Right, they have lives to get back to.
They are completely disillusioned with the military bureaucracy that has trapped them. The formal chain of command has failed to provide them with any answers. Their official timeline for going home is just a perpetually rolling, meaningless phrase. 6 to 10 days.
Just stringing them along.
When you tell a group of intelligent civilians 6 to 10 days for 2 months straight, they stop believing you. They are going to seek alternative solutions.
And when a battalion of civilian professionals decides the military chain of command has failed them, what do? They use their civilian skills. Which brings us to the breaking point. The men of the 323 are sitting on their pile of goat bones, drinking warm water, and they realize something infuriating. There is a camp of Iraqi refugees nearby, at a place called Safwan, and the Marines realize the refugees are arguably living better than they are.
The living conditions were objectively similar. Tents, MREs, dust. But the psychological difference was massive. The refugees were being cared for, they were the center of humanitarian effort, and crucially, they were with their families. The Marines were isolated from theirs.
And the psychological insult is compounded by the fact that they have radios. They're listening to the Armed Forces radio network. And the military DJ is playing songs and dedicating them on the air to the 323, calling them the Lost Battalion or the Forgotten Battalion.
That is the spark. The military's own broadcasting apparatus is publicly acknowledging their abandonment. It validates their anger. That is the catalyst for action.
So a Lance Corporal named Dana Duree, a reservist from Searcy, Arkansas, decides he has had enough. He takes matters into his own hands. He somehow makes his way 15 miles across the brutal desert into downtown Kuwait City.
Just sneaks away.
Right. He finds the International Hotel. Now, he doesn't go there to sit at the bar. He doesn't go there to sleep in a soft bed. He sneaks in to find a working international telephone. And who does this Lance Corporal call to fix his logistical nightmare? Does he call his commanding general? Does he call the Pentagon? No. He calls his local congressman, Representative Ray Thornton of Arkansas.
This is such a phenomenal moment to analyze because it perfectly encapsulates the unique nature and power of the American reservist. It highlights the difference in civil-military relations.
How so?
If you are dealing with a career, active-duty infantry battalion, the culture is heavily ingrained to suffer in silence. You follow the chain of command no matter how broken it is, because stepping outside, it will end your 20-year career. But you cannot tell a battalion of pharmacists and college students to sit quietly on a pile of goat bones indefinitely.
Because they aren't career military. They're civilians first.
Exactly. They are taxpayers. They are voters. They understand intuitively how to leverage the democratic system. They realized the military executive hierarchy was a dead end. So they bypassed the executive branch entirely and went straight to the legislative branch. They appeal to the people who control the military's budget.
It is arguably the most aggressively American way to solve a military logistics problem, deploying your elected representative. And it wasn't just Lance Corporal Duree. Once he broke the seal, a massive grassroots campaign detonated. Suddenly, at least 5 congressmen and senators are getting calls directly from a war zone on their office phones.
And the families back home get involved, too.
Oh, absolutely. Back in the States, the wives, the girlfriends, the parents, they immobilize. They flood Washington, D.C. with angry phone calls demanding to know why their husbands are rotting on a hill in Kuwait.
And we should look at the rhetoric they used because it was very carefully calibrated. They weren't mutinying, they weren't refusing orders, they weren't abandoning their posts. There is a quote from Lance Corporal Kenny Rich in the Post article that perfectly summarizes the mentality of this reservist strike.
What did he say?
He said, "Look, we're not whining. Well, we are whining, but listen, we fought, we did our jobs. If called upon again, we'd serve again, but let us go home when the fighting's over."
It is so refreshingly honest. We did the hard part. We fought your war flawlessly. Now do your job, fix the spreadsheet, and get us off this hill. And the craziest part, it worked. The political pressure from the lawmakers, massively amplified by the Washington Post exposing the absurdity of Hill 99 to the public, finally forced the gears of Desert Calm to turn for the 323.
It forced the military leadership to recognize that the rigid, unyielding application of a logistical doctrine was creating a massive political and public relations disaster back home. It is a classic historical example of how outside pressure, democratic pressure, is sometimes the only thing with enough force to overcome entrenched bureaucratic inertia. The military couldn't justify keeping them there anymore.
So after all of this, what does this story actually mean? Let's trace the incredible arc we've just covered. The civilian men of the 323 carry the massive, heavy, bloody legacy of Iwo Jima on their shoulders.
A huge weight.
They carried it right into the burning, apocalyptic oil fields of Kuwait. When their high-tech lasers failed in the smoke, they adapted with map grids and mortars. They fought a flawless, highly lethal ground war, captured hundreds of the enemy, and survived the suffocating 6-hour terror of chemical alarms.
They did everything asked of them.
And then they faced their toughest battle, surviving the sheer apathy of their own military machine on a hill covered in bones.
And you might be asking yourself, why should I care about this specific unit from a war 30 years ago?
Right. Why does it matter today?
You should care because warfare is almost never the clean history book summary of brilliant flanking maneuvers, perfect logistics, and laser-guided bombs hitting their targets. War is deeply messily human. It is about the endurance of waiting in the dark. It's about the utter absurdity of bureaucracy, and it is about the grit required to survive not just the enemy's bullets, but the agonizing, mismanaged aftermath of your own victory.
Exactly. It's always about the people inside the uniforms, dealing with systems much larger than themselves. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to ponder today. As a society, we spend billions of dollars engineering Kevlar armor, thermal optics, and complex MOPP suits to protect the soldier's physical body from enemy fire and gas.
We protect the body very well.
But how do you protect a soldier's mind? How do you protect them from the agonizing realization that, to the very system they are fighting for, they are sometimes just a box left unchecked on a shipping manifest? It really makes you wonder, the next time you hear about a flawless sweeping military victory on the news, what kind of 110-degree hill the victors are currently sitting on, just waiting for a flight home.